I was a police officer, and that's the main thing they taught, is the nonverbal indicators of deception. But I found once I got into the verbal indicators of deception are far better at predicting deception than nonverbals.
Welcome back to another episode of SaltCubeAnalytics, a channel dedicated to decoding human behavior. My guest today is Jack Schafer, a former special agent from the FBI with 20 years of experience in counterintelligence. As you will hear in the interview, Jack not only has a distinguished FBI career on his CV, but is an accomplished author of several best-selling books and an academic researcher with countless published papers relating to his area of expertise. Jack is the latest in a series of guest speakers on this channel who emphasizes that if you want to find out what people think and feel, you have to listen, truly listen, to what they're saying, because people have much less control over what they're saying than they think. That's a fact that has been confirmed by scientific research. If you want to do a little self-experiment, you can do so on my website SaltCubeAnalytics.com. Choose the words from the menu bar and scroll down till you find Join us for a little experiment. Nonverbal communication, on the other hand, although endlessly promoted, cannot live up to its promise when it comes to deception detection. That's why Jack wrote a PhD on the grammatical differences between truthful and deceptive narratives and uses statement analysis to differentiate the truth from the lies. This is not only fully in line with my own academic research, but is confirmed by several subject matter experts whose interviews you can find on this channel. But it doesn't end there. In order to extract truthful and sometimes critical information from criminals, terrorists, and apprehended spies, Jack has developed his own techniques to gain trust and to elicit information, some of which he shares with you in this interview. This being said, if you're in search for mild entertainment, then this video is probably not what you're looking for. If instead you want to learn from a true expert about deception detection, building trust and elicitation, then you're at the right place. Jack Schafer, thank you so much for joining. It's my absolute pleasure having you here. How are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
We have a common acquaintance. It's Robin Dreek. I interviewed him, I believe, 2 weeks ago. And he was kind enough to assist me with this arrangement, and you were kind enough to agree. I am looking forward to discuss linguistic cues of deception with you, and we then overlap into elicitation. In both areas, you're a subject matter expert. Okay. Now, before we do that, I have some information which I would like to introduce here, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay.
What makes you especially interesting? Yeah, right. There's what I observed, there is a gap between scientists and practitioners in the field, and you're both. Because today, I believe you're still the professor or a professor at the Western Illinois University, right?
Yes.
So still teaching. And you have a distinguished career at the FBI. You were not only a FBI special agent, but you were also associated with the behavior analysis team from the FBI. Can you tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, with the behavioral analysis team, it's a little bit different than the one you typically see on TV. The one you typically see on TV is called the Behavioral Analysis Unit. What they do is they handle criminal investigations. So they go to a crime scene, and based on the evidence and artifacts at the crime scene, they try to figure out who could possibly be a suspect. They don't know who the suspect is, but they try to profile who the suspect might be. In the behavioral analysis program, we typically have a suspect, we have a subject, and we try to learn as much as we can about that suspect or subject, and then what we do is we try to devise or design strategies to obtain a particular objective based on that person's personality or weakness thereof or vulnerabilities. So it's a little bit different. The ones on TV work with crime scenes. We work typically with counter-espionage and counter-terrorism.
So before we go into all those details, let me just highlight what else you're doing, right? So you wrote a book, Psychological Narrative Analysis. This is more for, I would say, professionals. But you also wrote a more recent book, The Truth Detector, which is more, I would say, for the more general public.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. We will discuss both of them in a little bit more detail. You also wrote a book about advanced interviewing techniques.
Yes.
Then you have published, I don't know how many papers, Jack. I lost count. How many scientific papers did you write?
I lost count too. A bunch of them.
A bunch of them, yeah.
I don't keep track anymore.
Yeah. Psychopathology of hate, ethics in law enforcement, and of course deception detection. Very interesting for our discussion today. Not to forget, you're of course also the author of the book The Like Switch. So maybe you give us in a nutshell what's the content of the like switch, because it's quite known.
What the like switch is made up of is when I was doing interviewing with criminals and terrorists, I would use a lot of techniques, behavioral techniques that I gathered from a lot of different sources. And I was rather successful with the techniques I used. And then as I got toward the end of my career, people suggested that the same techniques we used to build rapport with suspects and subjects to get them to do what we want them to do, that work in the social and business world. So what I did is I converted all the techniques we use to influence people in the FBI and the criminal world, and kind of translated it to personal use in the personal situations and business situations. So it's how to influence people, how to win them over, and it's filled with a lot of life hacks, little things that we probably knew, but we didn't know we knew them. And I just gave those techniques a name, and now people are able to use them intentionally.
Okay, 2 questions. I know it's not good to ask compound questions. 2 questions, yeah? First of all, how long have you been with the FBI?
20 years, and I retired.
I know, yeah, but 20 years, okay. And now you're teaching for how long in the university?
12 years. 12 years at Western Illinois University teaching law enforcement, criminal justice.
Okay. And now can you give us 1 or 2 examples of those life hacks in what you described in the like switch? Just 1 or 2.
1 or 2. Well, this is interesting. When we first meet people, we want to get them to like us very quickly. We can use 3 very basic nonverbal indicators of friendliness, and we call those like the top 3. And the first one is a long distance signal, which is an eyebrow flash. So when we approach one another, we eyebrow flash each other, and that lets each other know that we're not a threat. So we pass each other with eyebrow flash. And if you don't believe me, the first time you see somebody in the morning, you say, "Hey, how you doing?" The second time you see that person in the morning, you don't say, "Hey, how you doing?" You'll typically eyebrow flash, or you'll do the guys will do the chin thing, which all those are is little signals that say, "I'm not a threat." So an eyebrow flash is a long distance. So when you approach people, you'll see eyebrow flashes. And it's like 1/64th of a second. The brain picks it up very quickly. And we don't know we're actually doing that until you once I tell people about it, they go like, "Oh my gosh, I eyebrow flash hundreds of times a day." Yes, you do. You just don't know you do it. The second one's a head tilt. When you tilt your head, you're exposing your carotid artery. And what that does is tells the other person, "I trust you enough to expose a very vulnerable part of my body." So you want to head tilt this way or this way to expose that carotid. And the third friend signal is a smile. When people smile, they release endorphins. And when you release endorphins, you make somebody feel good about themselves. That's what endorphins do. They make you feel good about yourself. And the golden rule of friendship is, if I make you feel good about you, you're going to like me. So the first thing I can do when I meet somebody is to smile, and then they'll release endorphins. And then that makes them feel good about them, therefore they're going to like me. So those are just 3 life hacks, real quickly, that we can go to a perfect stranger and make instant friends with them, or in the case, instant rapport.
The eyebrow flash, the 3 signals that you just mentioned, they're also in this book, the
Yes.
Truth Detector. And what I consciously tried out now, I'm on my morning runs. Every time someone encounters me, either another runner, a pedestrian, or a bicycle, I do nothing else than eyebrow flush. And they all greet back. I would say 95, 98% of the people you do this, they greet back. I have never seen them before. Yeah. Normally, I run in such a tunnel. Yeah. But you do that, everybody is greeting you back. It must be kind of reflexive activity.
Well, it's normal human behavior that we do all the time. We just don't know we do it. And so by me pointing it out, people now are aware they do it, and they can do it intentionally like you did on your run. So when we try to elicit people and get information from them without them really knowing they're giving up sensitive information, we want them to like us first. And that's why it's included in the truth detector. Because if we just walk up to a perfect stranger, eyebrow flash, head tilt, and smile, they're going to like us. And if you like somebody, then you can start to influence that person.
Completely agree. Jack, before we continue, let me frame our conversation a little bit, right? So I'm especially interested in deception detection in the corporate context, and more specifically in the context of negotiations. There is a lot of research concerning specifically deception during the negotiations and also high stakes negotiations. So there's no question they exist. Some scientists even claimed to be successful, you have to apply deceptive strategies in high stakes negotiation, etc., etc. So that's the overall framework, but it's not limited to. Yeah? Some people say everything is a negotiation. In which restaurant you go, whom you marry, what you wear tonight, or what your wife wears tonight, everything is a negotiation. So all the negotiation techniques can be applied in the daily life too, right? Now, what I really would like to highlight our conversation briefly, yeah? Because for me, you are very special in a specific sense. What I have observed in my own research is that there's a gap between scientists on one side and practitioners in the field on the other side. And that can be very specific. I've interviewed Abhinam Sapir, for example, the creator of scientific content analysis. I've also interviewed Mark McClitch, the inventor of, let's say, statement analysis. They're kind of in your field too. They are absolutely convinced about the technique. They have extremely valid arguments for the techniques, but I've also done my research on the topic, and the research is mixed, is ambivalent. Yeah. Now, I completely understand the argument that, in a laboratory situation, you cannot replicate real life in a laboratory condition. And of course, you cannot train somebody for 4 or 5 days and then expect to have the same result, let's say like Abhinam or Mark have themselves, or you yourself, with a lifetime of experience. It's just not working. Yeah. But you are both. As I said already, you are a practitioner with 20 years of experience, and you are a scientist, which makes you, for the purpose of this conversation, highly, highly interesting. Have I captured you correctly so far?
So far, you're good.
Good. So I have a couple of entry points. Yeah. For example, what exactly is it with your specific background? What is it that you teach at the university?
I teach behavioral analysis, which is what I did in the FBI. Basic behavioral analysis techniques. I teach report writing, police report writing. I teach interviewing techniques, how to interview people. And that's the areas I typically cover.
Okay. So if we make it a bit more specific in regards to behavior analysis, what exactly are you teaching in regards to behavior analysis?
What I try to do is teach people how to quickly assess somebody's personality type, and I typically refer to the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, because that's a very simple tool, and it's a tool that takes a snapshot of who that person is at the time we're talking to them, and because it's on a continuum, either you're an extrovert or an introvert, and it's easy on this 4 continuum type indicator. If it's not me, if what you do is not me, then it's opposite of me. So if you're doing something that's something I wouldn't do, then it's opposite. So I'm an extrovert. If you're doing things that I wouldn't do, then you're probably an introvert. So if you get to know who you are, it's very easy to type somebody else. And once you type them, you can take all those behavioral characteristics associated with that type, and you can learn how to effectively communicate with that person. And that goes over into negotiations. Because when I negotiate with you, I want to negotiate at the same communication channel that you're using. So if you're an introvert or you're a sensor, and sensors like things very stepwise, they like things in lists and steps. So I'm an intuitor, which I don't like lists, I don't like steps, I like looking at the broad picture. So if I'm talking to you and you're a sensor, what I'm going to do is say, let's look at a list of the benefits. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I will go through this very detailed list, and you're very happy with that. So therefore, I'm changing my communication style to meet your communication channel so we can effectively talk to one another. Likewise, if I'm an extrovert and you're an introvert, extroverts make spontaneous decisions. They can go with the flow. They can, bob and weave. Introverts, however, they take things in. They have to think about those things. They go home. They think further about those things. And then they come back the next day and say, yes, it's a good deal. I think we'll take it. So what I typically do recommend with introverts is say, hey, please take all the information I've told you. And by the way, I've gathered information from all our competitors. I want you to go home and look at it. I want you to think about it, sleep on it, and then come back the next day and you will buy my product. So what I've done is I've allowed that introvert to go home with all the material of my competitors and mine product. They make a decision, and then I've also embedded a command in there. You will come back tomorrow and you will buy my product. So that's called an embedded command. So what I'm doing is taking my extroverted tendencies and pushing them aside, and I'm concentrating on how you as an introvert would process information to my advantage.
Yeah, and I've seen in your book, the Truth Detector, that you even tailor the elicitation techniques based on the personality types that you have observed. But again, we're going to discuss this a little bit later when we come to the elicitation.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Very, very briefly, because this is a question I really like to ask my guests. In regards to behavior analysis and your own training when you joined the FBI, how was that for you?
I took the training starts from the day you start investigating people, and you build and build and build. And then I was invited to join the behavioral analysis program, and that was extensive training. It took about 2 years of training, continuous training over 2 years to become really good at it.
So what kind of, so the key items in those 2 years, what were you trained about?
We were trained about mostly personality, how personality works, deviant personalities, a lot of practical things as where do people draw their social lines? What will they break, social norms? So if you aren't supposed to be going out at night, do you go out at night? If you're not supposed to do a certain thing, do you break that? How about gambling? If you're not supposed to gamble, do you gamble? How about cheating on your wife? If you cheat on your wife, you broke that social norm. You broke other social norms. Where will you stop breaking social norms? Espionage, perhaps. If you break all the other social norms, then perhaps you'll be willing to commit espionage and break that social norm. Versus somebody who is honest, they don't drink, they don't smoke, they don't gamble, they don't cheat on their wife. They cannot be good spies for us. They won't break those social norms. Therefore, they're not good for recruiting.
How did you become involved with FBI's behavior analysis? How does that work? You said you were invited, but...
Well, I just went about my business. I was a counterintelligence officer. In other words, I was charged with catching spies. I caught a number of spies, and they started to notice that I caught a number of spies, and they asked me how I did it, and I went back to Washington and told them how I did it, and then they said, maybe you can join our team. And I said, okay.
That was the team where later other quite known names were engaged with, right? If I'm not mistaken, I mean, Robin sowieso. I know Robin said you were his mentor,
Yes.
right? But there are other known names. I don't know, Chris Voss?
Joe Navarro.
Joe Navarro, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So if you look back at those 20 years, when you came to the behavior analysis team and when you left, when you can compare, what was the most significant advances or improvements during your time there?
I think experience is the key. The more you see people reacting to certain stimuli, the more you can do with it, the bigger repertoire you have. Now, since I've been doing it so long, and I left the bureau, I retired. Now, in my social world, I can predict people's behavior very quickly because I've seen it over and over and over the years. So once you get good at something like that, once you reach a certain level of expertise, you can jump out into the real world, and I can use it rather quickly. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
As far as
yes, it makes sense on a personal level, but I meant more the program itself, the FBI itself. How did the program itself develop in the last 20 years? I mean, there must have been quite some significant advances.
I don't know. I was advancing with it, so I don't have anything to compare it against.
Understand? Okay, understand.
So it's kind of like growing up. You don't realize you've grown up till you turn around and look at the rearview mirror and go, I guess I've come a long way. But you don't realize you're going a long way when you're doing it. With
all your knowledge, that's not a question I have on my list here, but with all your knowledge, and you look at the world today, right? How, and I don't want to go political, yeah, but how do you view what's going on today in terms of behavior analysis?
Well, the guardrails have been removed from the road, so to speak. When I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, there were guardrails. You go down the road, you hit a guardrail, you bounce back onto the road. Now, there's no guardrails. There's no truth. There's no reality. It's my truth, my reality. Well, a lot of times your truth and your reality don't comport with reality in the real world. So people are basically doing whatever they want to do, whatever they see is right in their own eyes. There's no right and wrong anymore. And so, therefore, the world gets thrown into chaos.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're very close to chaos. Yeah. But again, this is not the topic of this conversation, but thank you for your insights. Before we go, I'm guiding this. Yeah. So let's start with nonverbal versus verbal deception. Generally speaking, yeah? What's your take on this? Nonverbal deception detection cues versus, let's say, verbal/linguistic deception detection.
Okay, there's a large difference between verbal and nonverbal. Let's look at the nonverbal. What nonverbal based on two general theories: cognitive load, which means a person who's lying is using almost all of their brain power to maintain that lie. In other words, they have to remember what they said, what they didn't say, what they want to say, what their story is, the facts of the story, and they have to pay attention to their verbals, their nonverbals. In addition to that, they have to look at their lie target, and they have to figure out if that person is buying off on that. So they have to monitor the lie target's verbals, nonverbals, and all those things that go into nonverbal behavior, communication. So your brain is fully loaded. So what you want to do then is you add additional cognitive load to that person where their brain is overloaded, it can't function anymore, and therefore you can pick up whether that person is cognitively overloaded or not. Typically, truthful people have a lot of excess brain power they can use because they're telling the truth. They don't have to worry about all those excess of things that liars have to worry about. The second theory is the fight or flight response. The fight or flight response simply says, if I'm going to lie to you and there's a threat, if I get caught lying, then my body goes into an autonomic fight or flight response. In other words, respiration increases, heart rate increases, sweating increases, and you see a lot of built up energy because your body's getting ready to fight or run away. But if you can't fight or you can't run away, you have to sit and talk to me. You have to dissipate that energy because the body likes homeostasis or equilibrium. So it's constantly trying to bring the body back to equilibrium. And how does it get rid of the excess energy? It scratches, it taps, it wiggles the feet, wiggles the hands, and the feet start wiggling. So, and bodies turn and all those things associated with flight or fight, but you can't, so you have to dissipate the energy. So the problem then is it doesn't measure whether you're lying or not. It measures whether you're physiologically aroused by the question that's put to you. And that could have a lot of false indicators. In other words, if I talk to you, and in fact this happened to me in a real case, they asked me to go in and talk to somebody they believed kidnapped a 4-year-old girl. And they said, he did it, just get him to confess and produce the body or the girl. And so I'm going like a half an hour, 45 minutes into the interview, and what happens? This guy starts showing all kinds of nonverbal indicators of deception. And I'm going like, he must have done it. And then I get the phone call that says, oh, we got the real guy. So I looked at the guy and I thought, why are you acting so strange? He says, because I like halfway during this interview, I started to become afraid that I was going to go to jail for something I didn't do. So his physiological responses were due to what? The fear of him going to jail, not what? Not that he committed the crime. And that's called a false positive. We get false positive with witnesses. If they're down in a bad neighborhood and they're maybe with a prostitute and they see a crime and they want to be a witness, they don't want to be a witness because then they have to go home and tell their wives what they did. So what do they fear? They don't fear the crime itself. They don't fear talking about it. They fear losing the confidence of their wife. So that's what makes it different than the verbals.
So we completely agree. There are no universally accepted non-verbal deception cue. Pinocchio's nose does not exist, despite thousands of books who claim the contrary.
Yes.
Right?
Well,
it's just not.
So what you have to look for is clusters and clusters of clusters. And all that tells you is whatever I told you that caused that reaction is a sensitive topic to you. It doesn't mean you did it. It just means it's very sensitive to you. So when I see a lot of clusters of nonverbals, there is a possibility the person's lying, but there's also a lot of other possibilities. So when I go into an interview, I always look for competing hypotheses. I say this person could be lying to me, perhaps the person's not lying to me. And then you look to see the preponderance of the evidence at the end of the interview, because honest people say and do things that make them look guilty. Guilty people say and do things that make them look innocent. So we have to look for the preponderance of evidence. And that's, on the nonverbal side, that's difficult. It takes a lot of practice. There's no silver bullet. I scratch my nose, I'm lying. No, it's because my nose is itchy. Or I cross my arms, that means it's blocking. I'm lying. No, it means I'm crossing my arms. But if you see a lot of other indicators, like a good indicator of truthfulness is symmetrical shoulder shrug, palms up, touch your chest. I didn't do it. Now that's a cluster of 3 nonverbal indicators of truthfulness. So you see how you can use the clusters.
So I always like to stress, despite that I'm quite outspoken about you cannot use nonverbal communication for deception detection, that does not invalidate nonverbal communication in general, because there are a number of things that are really, really interesting to observe. Yeah? A person's personality, intention, motivation, unconscious thoughts and feelings, fear, status, dominance, all these kind of things can be deducted from observing body language, right? It's just when it comes to deception detection, you can see stress, but you never know what has caused the stress. Yeah? So that's absolutely.
Unless you further explore. So think of it in geological
Yes.
terms. The geologists can't tell the oil producers where the oil is, but they can tell you where it probably is or might be. They'll tell you, okay, dig there, you might get oil. So nonverbals are kind of like that. We can tell you, yeah, why don't you dig there? You might find something. Again, then you might not. But at least it gives you kind of a broad indicator of what causes that person's stress.
Yeah, that's a good comparison. I'm gonna remember that one. Yeah. Now, knowing that you are really focusing on linguistic deception, so on linguistics and deception markers, I was wondering what brought you, because I mean, that was probably not a common path to take, right? So what was this one epiphany or this one happening that showed you, hey, this for me is the way to go. I go not nonverbal, I go into linguistics.
I wish I had a good story to tell you, but each of us on the behavioral analysis team, we have to, what do they call it, develop expertise in a certain area. And there was 9 of us on the team at the time, and everybody, the other 8 people had their own expertises that they had developed. The only one left was statement analysis. So they said, you're going to become an expert in statement analysis.
And you said yes.
So that's no sexy story behind that. It's just,
Okay, I understand. But you said you had some training in regards, I tried to compare nonverbal with verbal, yeah? But you had some training in regards to nonverbal communication and nonverbal deception too.
oh
right?
yes, yeah, I had a lot of training in that. I was a police officer, and that's the main thing they taught is the nonverbal indicators of deception. But I found once I got into the verbal indicators of deception are far better at predicting deception than nonverbals.
Okay, now we are going to the core. Now tell us why.
Okay, what happens is in our brains, when we're telling the truth, or we'll just break it further than that. When we think in terms of nouns and verbs in our brain. And if the nouns and verbs in our brain do not specifically match what the activity we want to describe, we have to add things. And what we do is we add adverbs to change the characteristics of the verb, the action of the verb, and we add adjectives to change the activities or the characteristics of the noun. So what we have then is we have to transform that into what we want to specifically want. So that idea goes from our brain, it goes to an area in our brain called Wernicke's area, where that idea, those words get hooked up with the meaning of those words, and that's where we transform that grammar. And then that shoots it over to Broca's area, and in Broca's area, that's where that meaning gets hooked up with words. And then once the words are hooked up with the meaning, it goes yet to another part of our brain that teaches us how to move your larynx, your tongue, and how to form the words. So it's a very complex process that you have to go through in order to have language that can be understood by people. Now, let's talk about the general lie. When we lie, we think in terms of present tense. So if I'm thinking about lying to you right now, in my brain, I'm thinking in the present tense. But in order to make it believable, I have to use the past tense, don't I? To let you know that it happened in the past. So I have to take that present tense, convert it or transform it into the present tense, transform it into the past tense, and then come out with it. But the problem is, remember, we're cognitively overloaded. We may be in the fight-flight response. We don't have the full capacity of our brain to make all those corrections from present tense to past tense. And that's what's called leakage. So a person will start out in the past tense because they actually did it. It's first person past tense is a sign of truthfulness. But then all of a sudden they'll go from the past tense, they'll start speaking in the present tense. And then when they're done lying, they'll go back to the past tense again. So you can look at their statement and say, why did they transfer the past tense to the present tense? Well, that's because they're making it up in present tense time. And they haven't had the ability to what? Transform it into past tense. So we look, that's one of the main indicators of nonverbal deception is past tense. So the first thing I look at in any statement is the first person simple past tense. If you speak in the first person, it means I am committed to this. I am putting my name to this. I am committing to this particular activity or thought. Past tense means I'm going into my memory to pick it up. If I don't use first person simple past tense, or if I use first person present tense, that means I'm creating it in my head at the time, which means it's not past tense, it's made up.
You summed it up, the process, how we speak. You summed it up very, very well. I think one of the largest misconceptions about language is that we have control over what we are saying, right? I'm pretty sure you know James Pennebaker's research.
James who? Pennebaker?
James.
Oh yeah, I'm very familiar with him.
Yes. So you as a native speaker, you have 100,000 words in your vocabulary. No, you're an academic, you're probably more. Active use, let's say 20,000 words, right? And Pennebaker divided function words from content words. Yeah, content words like table, Thomas, sky, not only nouns, yeah, but content with meaning, yeah, and function words, pronouns, articles, auxiliary verbs, etc., etc. There are a couple of interesting things, and I make it very short. From those 100,000 in the English language, there are only 450 function words. And we are using those 450 function words 55% of the time. But the best part is, coming back to what you said about the brain, those 450 function words are processed in a different part of the brain. And if I as a speaker would want to control my function words whilst I'm speaking, the cognitive load will be so high that I would not be able to process my speech. And you as an investigator, if you want to analyze my function words, the same thing. You wouldn't be able to follow what I'm saying. Yeah, which makes those words so interesting. Problem with that is, who can do that live? Yeah, you need artificial intelligence. You need programs in retrospect.
No, I'm going to disagree with you. I had the same problem, and I looked at the problem, and I said, you know what? There's got to be an easier way for policemen on the street to figure it out. And it's something I developed called text bridges. People tell the truth up to the point they want to withhold information. They withhold the information, and then they tell the truth again. That's the way 90% of people lie that way, because it's the best, easiest way to lie. Because the only thing you have to remember is what you left out. The rest of it's truthful. Now, I said to myself, wouldn't it be interesting to find out how do people transition over the withheld information using grammar structures? So it's like that road that goes to a river. The road stops, you have to build a bridge, and then the road starts again. You go on the bridge over to the other road. So what happens with the bridge, there's only so many ways to build that bridge, or the bridge falls down. There's only so many ways to build a bridge. So I can predict how that bridge is going to be built. Same way with grammar structure. I can predict when people leave out information, and it's called a text bridge. The most common, there's 7 of them that cover 98% of the way people lie. And one of the most common one is then. So what you're going to listen for is people leaving out then. Now, the one problem that we have is, if I ask you, if say you were to ask me, what did you do this morning? I got up, and then I went for a ride on my bicycle, and then I had breakfast, and then I took a shower, and then I went to work. I'm not telling you everything I did that day. What am I telling you? How am I not telling you? How am I leaving things out? I'm using the word what? And then, and then, and then. So, truthful people use text bridges at the same rate as deceptive people. Now, where this becomes important is, if you go to the part of the statement, either oral or written, that covers the incident proper, or the incident itself, that's when you want to pay attention to text bridges. So it's broken up into 3 section statements: the preamble, the incident, and the epilogue. So what I'm really interested in is the what? Incident itself. So where were you when you robbed the bank? Between 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock, the bank was robbed. Where were you, sir? I did this, and then I went home. So now that and then tells you there's withheld information. And if it's during the critical part of the interview, then you're going to want to what? Dive right there. Back to the oil analogy. There's missing information. You want to know what that missing information is. And it's very hard to defeat text bridges. I often have people try their very best to try to outfox me. And it's very difficult with text bridges.
I believe we are in full agreement here, coming a level higher, that linguistic deception markers are more suitable than nonverbal deception.
Yes, I believe that 100%.
Yes.
But now, wouldn't it be nice to get a combination of those things? And
Absolutely.
I've done that too.
Absolutely.
And it's called a micro-action interview. So what you want to do is you take that person, like somebody shoplifted from a store. We'll use that example. I did this. I walked up to the cooler, and then I left the store. So you say, okay, and then means you're missing information. I want to know what that is, so I'm going to take you back to the point right before the text bridge. I'm going to anchor you and say, so you were at the cooler. Yes, I was. Then I'm going to ask you what happened next. You're going to provide me with a little information, and then you're going to say, and then I left the store. So I'm going to go back to where that little added information, I'll say, so you were at the end of this added information. What happened next? And then I'll say this, they'll give you a little bit more information, and then text bridge out of it. So what happens is that gap gets narrower and narrower. And what you want to do then is you're putting a lot of pressure on that person, aren't you? To try to figure out how not to say that I shoplifted something. So what happens to that person is they now put pressure on themselves. And now that's when you get nonverbal indicators of deception, because they're breaking their own threshold. They're fearing, I'm going to get caught. I can't wiggle out of this thing. I'm going to get caught. Now you start seeing the nonverbals. So you can take the verbal indicator tells you where there's missing information, and then you use the micro-action interview, and you just cover every micro-action that person did. Every movement, no matter how slight, you want to record that, have them tell you what that is, and then they'll text bridge out of it. Then you go back and say, what happened next? And you keep going back and back. The gap closes, and that's when the nonverbal indicators kick in. So now you have two combination of verbals and nonverbals. And what's interesting is if you ask honest people, there's a gap in their story, right? And then, so I go back and go through a micro-action interview. They typically say, Mr. Schafer, why are you asking me so many questions? Well, you didn't do this, did you, sir? Oh, no, sir, I didn't. Well, then if I can figure out what you did every second of time during the time when the crime was committed, we can prove you didn't do this. And you know what the innocent person says? Ask any question you want. Keep them coming, because I didn't do it. So they'll close that gap and not have any problems.
I think you said something very crucial. So multi-channel analysis is by far, and again, it's based on scientific research, multi-channel analysis, which includes so face, body, voice, verbal style, verbal content, psychophysiology, all these kind of things, has the greatest promise when it comes to deception detection. Yeah. But there's specific advantages when it comes to linguistic deception markers, because, for example, you don't need to baseline. You don't need to have the person in your room. I'm sure you can list a number of other advantages.
And you don't have to induce detection apprehension. In other words, if I'm talking to you, and I'm going to have to say, look, when you lie, there's a little neon sign over your head that goes liar, liar, liar. I mean, your nonverbal is like, wow, you're a liar. I mean, I could pick that up in a heartbeat. What am I doing? I'm increasing what? Detection apprehension, making you more hypersensitive to the possibility of getting caught. And that increases detection apprehension, which is the basis for what? The fight, flight response and cognitive overload. So I have to induce that. But with linguistic, the verbal indicators, You don't need to get a baseline is nice if you're going past tense, present tense, past tense. So it sometimes can be useful, but it's not required. And that's what makes it, and you don't have to be under stress. I don't have to put you under stress. You could write me a statement out right now, and I could tell you where you lied. And that's what I did a lot of my research on with my dissertation for my PhD. What I did was I had people lie to me and then tell the truth, and I looked at the difference of the linguistics, and I found that's how I discovered the text bridges. The other thing that is very powerful is something called spontaneous negations. If I ask you what you did and you tell me what you did not do, there's about a 90% chance that you lied to me. So, and that's, in the situation of, well, I didn't steal the money. If that's in an open, it can't be an answer to a direct question. Did you steal the money? No, I didn't steal the money. That's not a spontaneous negation. If I ask you, what did you do today? And then you'll say, but I didn't steal the money. That means you probably did steal the money. It's called a spontaneous negation.
I have my finger already quite a while in a certain section of your book. As you can see, it's completely red with my own markers, which were very helpful in regards to my own academic research. There are lots of really practical tips in, it's more than tips, it's actually technical methodology based on science. So if someone is really interested in deception detection, using the words people speak, then this book is really helpful. And I know it because I based some of my own research on it. Yeah, so for me, again, it's a special pleasure to talk to you, Jack. Now, I know text bridges, then, so, after, when, as well, next. I think these words are, thanks to you, ingrained in my neural pathway up there. But in my own research was a little bit different. So if you have a linear line of events, then these text bridges are perfect. Yeah. Sometimes you don't have this linear events, this linear structure of events, right? And this is where then another technique of yours comes in, elicitation. Yeah. So in general terms, if we first talk about elicitation in general before we go into more detail, yeah. And I know that you're familiar with Hans Scharf and his technique. His book, The Interrogator, is an eye opener. It's not only a fantastic story, but for someone interested in elicitation, deception detection,
it's incredible. Before I forget, I wanted to go back to text bridges. Text bridges work in all languages. All languages contain text bridges. We've done research in China, and it works in China, it works in Korea, I went to Africa, and we did a tribal language called Twi. It worked in Twi, it works in Arabic, Russian, it works in, I haven't done anything with the Netherlands, but in Dutch, but I assume that the text bridges are going to be there.
Well, you are coming in 4 days to the Netherlands, here, where I am, and we can make some little experiments if you're here. But I'm pretty sure you will find exactly the same.
I'm confident I will. Now, on to elicitation. What elicitation does is you want to create an environment where a person is psychologically predisposed to tell you information that in what we're looking for is sensitive information that they would not ordinarily provide you under direct questioning.
There's a lot of scientific research stating that people actually do not like to lie, especially not outright, right? They will use all kinds of means to avoid to actually lie. Again, the popular belief is, many in these books behind me, they state we lie, 20 times an hour, 200 times a day or whatever. Okay, white lies, social lies, I completely understand. But when it comes, and again, corporate context, negotiations, I can tell you, negotiators do not like to lie. It's much too risky, right? They avoid to lie, outright lies at all costs, but they apply evasive strategies, right? And this is then where elicitation comes in handy, because if you have, let's say, acts of, I don't want to say sins or lies of omission, acts of omissions, right? There are various techniques: ambiguity, concealment, dodging questions, equivocation, evasion, half-truths, vagueness, these kind of things, right? Then your elicitation techniques come in when you spot this kind of evasive strategies, right? And this is again coming back to your text bridges. This is where I feel there's a little bit of difference. Yeah, from criminal perspective, when you need to establish a timeline of events, there you can have those text bridges. But let's say in a negotiation where you detect avoidance strategies, any of those that I've named, you need to approach this different, right? So I'm very interested to hear how you approach this, or how you would approach this.
It's based on human behavior. One of the strongest human behaviors that we have is the need to correct other people. Because when we correct other people, we raise ourselves above the person we're correcting. Therefore, we get an ego boost. That makes us feel good. We want to correct other people, even though we know we shouldn't, but we do. And it's powerful. And it's like you said, you're doing your research for your bachelor's degree, right?
No, I am finished. I made a master's in science, communication, behavior, and credibility analysis. Believe me or not, that's the actual title of the master's, which hangs behind me.
I just did that. I just used that elicitation technique on you, and I got a lot of information from you that perhaps you would not have given me under direct questioning, because you felt the need to correct.
Exactly. And I vividly remember the example that you have given from your student, where you pulled the same trick and it worked also. Yeah, so it's absolutely perfect.
I like to demonstrate it, and you know,
and it worked.
And
it worked.
You know
absolutely.
about this. You read about it. You researched about it, and yet you still fell for it.
Yeah, even worse, I heard you doing it. Yeah, I know the exact example. You told it about the student. She was a senior, and you said she's a sophomore or so, and I know the whole story.
So I'm just saying. I called. I said the comment you made was pretty insightful for a sophomore, and she held her, she kind of bit her tongue, and then about 2 or 3 minutes later, she goes, "I'm a senior," and I said, "Okay, well, why did you say?" She said, "I felt this overwhelming need to correct you." So, what we call now the technique that we use to take advantage of that, one of the techniques is called the presumptive. I just throw out a statement, whether it's true or it's not true. The person I'm talking to will either say, "Yes, that's exactly right," and then they'll add information, or "No, that's wrong," and then they'll tell you why it's wrong. And the example that I used with you is I told you a statement that was false, obviously, and then you corrected me, and then you added a lot of other stuff, didn't you? Now, and people do that with sensitive topics. So if I'm negotiating and I think maybe there's going to be a supply chain problem, me getting my parts on time, I'll say, "Geez, I understand that you're having problems with your supply chain. I read that in a internet article." And the person goes, "Oh, no, there's no, well, we've resolved those problems, or we're resolving those problems." So they're inadvertently what? Giving you information that they wouldn't otherwise tell you under direct questioning. If you directly ask that question, "Do you have supply chain problems?" Person, "No, we don't. Not at all."
And you have actually in your book 16, I marked them here, 16 different techniques, elicitation techniques you describe in your book, the Truth Detector, right? And talking of presumptive statements, there are two versions of it, right? I don't want to go into too much detail, but there are presumptive statements and presumptive questions, right?
You could say, I'm just trying. A presumptive question is, so there's no problems. So you are having problems with your supply chain, aren't you? You put that tag on it, aren't you? So you have a negative presumptive. And so what are they going to say? You're with the "aren't you" means it's I know you are, but then it's a negative question, so they have to correct it.
From those 16, let's say the top 3 that are most effective when you apply
Number
them.
one, the presumptive. Absolutely powerful technique. The second one is quid pro quo. I tell you something, you feel obligated to tell me something back. So if I want to know something about your company, I'll reveal something about my company, and then you'll reveal something about yours. And that goes back to Cialdini's reciprocity. People have a need to reciprocate. And he came out with all the research that kind of confirmed that philosophy, or that I was going to say presumptive, but it's almost a theory. I mean, it's almost been confirmed. So there's reciprocity. And then the other one I like to use is bracketing. So I could say, so you must be, based on our conversation and your work experience, you must be what, 40, 45 years old?
So now I'm supposed to answer, yeah?
But now you're hypersensitive.
I'm hypersensitive. Yeah, well, I lost all my hairs already, so I'm easily in this age category.
So, well, you're maybe a little older, maybe 50, 55?
I may be older,
55,
yes.
60.
Somewhere in between.
So what, about 57?
Very, very close.
You're dying not to tell me. Yes. You know you shouldn't, but yet you're telling me, aren't you?
Yes, absolutely.
So I like bracketing. And the other thing I like to use is reported references. Yeah, I read on the internet.
Yeah. So before we go on, before we lose bracketing, yeah, because for me bracketing was completely new. I actually had to look it up. Yeah, so bracketing is a technique where you aim for numbers, right? For something very specific for numbers. So what I want to say with this is there are different techniques for different means, for different goals, let's say, right? And that makes it really, really interesting, because depending on your desired outcome, you have different techniques. And again, to make it to put another layer on, you even analyze the personality type first, and then you also tweak the techniques that you are using to it. Yeah. So it's the outcome and the personality,
but you
and
can
then
also
you have the right technique
to find out ordinal things. Like what I do when I present is I will work into the presentation. My favorite actress is Sandra Bullock. She's number 1 on my list. Number 3 on my list is Rachel McAdams. So I've just bracketed. Now, what typically happens in class? No, if number 1 is Sandra Bullock, number 3 is Rachel McAdams. People always want to know what?
Yeah, where's number
Who's
2?
Number 2? Who's number 2?
Yeah, number 2.
So the goal that I set for the presentation is I want one student or one person in the group to ask me who's number 2. And that's based, we bracketed them, 1 and 3, but what causes them to ask about number 2? And that's the human predisposition. It's called curiosity, right? The human predisposition, we are curious. Humans are curious. We like to know what's going on. We want to know what's over the hill. We want to know what's on Mars. We want to know what's in outer space. We want to know who's next door. We want to know what this person's doing. We're very curious people. And so now I'm just taking advantage of that predisposition for curiosity.
Would you want to tell us very briefly the story about Hans Scharf, just to illustrate how effective and efficient the technique of elicitation can be, even
what he did was he made number 1, he made people feel at ease. He built rapport with those people, and he used the eyebrow flash, he used the head tilt, he used the smile. He doesn't specifically say he does that, but I'm certain he does it. The other thing he does is he develops common ground with the people. He would play chess with the prisoners. He was an interrogator in World War II, a German interrogator. He got a lot of information out of American airmen that were prisoners, and he would just walk around the camp. In other words, change of venue. He would walk around the camp, and people are predisposed to talk to one another when they're strolling. Whenever we stroll or walk with somebody, we're predisposed to talk, aren't we? Yes, we are. And he will also share food and drink with them. 75% of all information is exchanged over food and drink. So I will offer you a cup of coffee, and it's also if there's payment, I'm going to pay, because then that also induces reciprocity. So, and then what he does is he builds rapport sufficiently by finding common ground, by using empathic statements. And when we get people to like us, they want to tell us things because they like us, where they would not get it under direct questioning. But he can get it because the people want to tell him what's going on. So that's all he did. He made friends with people. And he manipulated the natural human tendencies that we're kind of talking about now. And the one thing that the Germans wanted, I remember reading in the book, you probably remember this, there was every fifth round was a tracer round coming out of the American, the color.
Color.
And the Germans wanted to know what that was.
Pistol.
So he made friends with the airmen and asked them, well, why do they change colors or whatever? And they said, well, that just means that they have so much ammunition left. Oh, that's it? Tells you when the plane, is running out of ammunition. So he was able to get that specific information from the airmen. And if you ask them directly under tense questioning, what does that mean? Say, I don't know, name, rank, serial number, because they don't like the person that's talking. Because would you tell secrets to somebody you didn't like? No. Same way with criminals. I do the same thing with criminals. I get them to like me, and then they tell me because they want to tell me because they like me.
Abhinam Sapir, I had a really, really interesting conversation with him. And the one thing that he stressed several times was, the less you ask, the more information you get. And this is fully in line also what you were saying. Yeah? It's the open statement that reveals the truth. Yeah? And in order to get a good open statement,
yes,
you have to build rapport. And there are the techniques, and you also described the techniques. Rapport building is, it goes back to Dale Carnegie already. He wrote about that, 100 years ago or so. Yeah, that's not something new. But, we know these things in the back of our mind. That's one thing. But then to consciously apply it in certain circumstances when probably you're also already maybe a little bit under stress, your own cognitive load is high, let's say again, in a negotiation context. Yeah. You have several people which you hardly know, and you need to trace them, you try to analyze them, you try to, baseline them in certain, so it's quite challenging.
That we use to make friends with people, to get people to like us, are normal human behaviors that one person expresses to another person in normal relationships when people become friends. So, but we don't know we're doing those things when we're becoming friends with people. All I did was take what people normally do, identified the technique, gave it a name, and now people can what? Intentionally use those techniques to achieve a goal. So the reason these things work is because that's what normal people do to make friends. Does that make sense? So this isn't so most people, when I tell them, when I get done with my presentation, they're going like, wow, I think I really knew all that stuff, but I didn't know I knew it. Now that I know it, I can intentionally use it during a negotiation or a business deal.
Yeah.
So it's intuitive, is what I'm saying. It's not complicated. It's very basic. It's human behavior, and that's why con men use the same techniques to what? To manipulate other people, to take advantage of other people. So the stuff in the book, both books actually do what? It's an offensive tool you can use for business and negotiation, but it's also a defensive tool. If you see people using these techniques on you, you can say, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. He's taking advantage of me. You see how people say, well, what you're teaching people is to manipulate other people. No, I'm teaching you to achieve a goal. And I'm also teaching you how to defend yourself against people who will use this very stuff against you and you not know what they're using against you. And I call it name it and claim it. And what they do is, if you say, hey, they'll use a technique, you say, I know exactly what that technique is. Once you understand what the technique is, you're inoculated from it. Does that make sense? So it works both ways.
Absolutely.
It protects you, and you can also use it to your advantage.
And it's a skill. It's a lifelong skill. Yeah, it's another tool that you have in your social intelligence toolbox, right? It requires a little bit of investment in terms of time and energy, yeah, and to maintain it like any other, I would say, language almost, right?
But what I tell people is, do you want to be a professional in your business world? Do you want to be a professional in your vocation or your avocation or whatever situation you're in, social? Do you want to be effective? Do you want to be a professional? If the answer is yes, then you put in the work. Because if I had a brain tumor, I wouldn't go to a neurologist. How many times have you done brain surgery? Well, this will be my first one. We're hoping for the best. No. I want a guy that puts in the time, that does the operations. How many have you done? Well, I've done like 1,000 of these operations, and they've all, for the most part, been successful. Maybe one or two complications, but for the most part, very successful. Who are you going to go to? So I that's what I tell people. They say, well, it's a lot of hard work to do this. Yeah, then go do something that doesn't require work, like slapping lug nuts on at the GM plant in Detroit.
No, we are very prone. We humans, we are very prone to let's say cognitive shortcuts. Sorry, right? One example that I like to mention, coming briefly back, and I know we are running over time. I'm aware of that. Very briefly, there is the Global Deception Research Team, and they found that did research in 75 different countries in 43 languages, and they found remarkable similarities around the globe. Yeah? And the one example that stood out for me is that, let's say, eye gaze aversion in it's twice 75, yeah, but in 75 countries, from those 75 countries, 75% of the population believes that if I cannot look you in the eye, that's a sign that I'm lying. And we know from science it's just not true. Yeah. So it's just not true. I'm just giving this as an example. We humans, we are cognitively lazy. We like shortcuts. And this is why we're also prone to also fall victim for those.
You know what? Tell you what, I'll close with this. I'll give you some techniques to test another person's veracity without that person knowing that you're testing their veracity. All right? The first one, and the most powerful one, is something called the well technique. So if I ask you a yes or no question, and your first word out of your mouth is well, it means you are about to give me an answer I'm not expecting. So let's simplify that. I send my kid into his bedroom to do his homework. I hear nothing but shenanigans going on in there, no homework. He comes out of the bedroom and I say, Junior, did you do your homework? Well, I say, get back here and do your homework. Now, let's analyze what that means. When he says well, means what answer does he think I'm expecting he's going to give me? Yes, Dad, I did my homework. Well, when he says well, it's anything but that expected answer, which is what? No. And any answer other than yes is no. So, am I getting a raise? No. Or, am I getting a raise? Well, that means what? You're not going to get a raise because they think I'm expecting the answer yes. Of course you'll get a raise. You're a hard worker. So, can we? You can do it for anything. Did you enjoy the class today? Well, that means you didn't. So, the well technique is extremely powerful. Extremely powerful technique. The second one, I'll give you two.
You said you had two.
The second one, there's 5, but let me see which one. The well technique. Oh, the other one is you ask a yes or no question. And yes or no questions deserve yes or no answers. If you can't answer no or yes, and you don't want to answer no or yes, you go somewhere between yes and no. The land between yes and no is what I call the land of is, based on President Clinton's famous, depends on the meaning of the word is. So what happens is, I'm asking you a yes or no question. If you can't answer yes or no, where are you going to take me? Because people, like you said earlier, people don't want to outright lie. So they'll use a lot of techniques to kind of convolute things, to try to, a lot of ambiguous things, a lot of innuendos, half-truths, odds and ends. They'll throw all kinds of things in there to confuse you, to obfuscate. So I'll ask the question again. I'll say, I'll say, were you at the crime scene on the day of the murder? There's no way I could have been there because I was, I'm going to school or I'm going to work and I had this and there's no way I could have been there. Did they answer yes or no? No. Then I'll say, that's very good that you've told me a lot about what you were doing, but were you at the crime scene at the time of the murder? And they say, well, and then they start going to the land of is again. Then you know that they're lying. There's a high probability of deception. Because truthful people, given that second chance to answer yes or no, will answer yes or no. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And there is one very simple thing that anyone could do to spot these kind of deceptive strategies, right? That's the very simple thing of listening, right? So Abhidham Sapi said it to me. Mark McLeish said it to me. You wrote it even in your book, and I have a marker in here somewhere. Listen, yeah. My own research. I had 30 senior executives in my study. They do not listen. All those avoidance strategy could have been spotted. It was not a quantitative study. It was a qualitative study. So I don't have the exact numbers, but my guesstimate is 95% of the deceptive strategies, or avoidance strategies, were successful. 95%, only because the counterpart did not listen. So you cannot overemphasize the importance of simply listening. If I already think about my response, which I'm tempted to whilst you're speaking, I'm lost. I will not catch it.
That's absolutely right. But people don't listen. And they don't suspend their ego. Everybody thinks the world revolves around them. But they're wrong. It revolves around me. So we're all in our own little worlds, especially now with the thumb talking and the social media. We're really closed off from people. And we don't listen to people. We don't watch the nonverbals. We don't listen for the words they speak. Words just don't plop out of people's mouths. They're very intentional because we went through the whole process by which we speak. It's very complicated. Things just don't plop out. So we have to listen. But we don't.
Their consequences attached on the highest levels, right? If leaders of nations do not listen,
absolutely,
there can be grave consequences. And unfortunately, this is what we're seeing.
A lot of wars have been started in the past because people didn't listen. They only heard what they wanted to hear. And that's a whole new topic.
It's a whole new topic. And I would be interested to explore it with you at any other time.
Okay, thank you. It's good being here.
Thank you for watching. If you came this far, it's safe to assume that you are really interested in decoding human behavior. As Jack said, if you want to be successful, truly successful, if you want to be a professional, then you have to put in the works. There are no shortcuts. It seems to me you're one of the few. Congratulations, you are ahead of the pack. And lastly, consider liking and subscribing if you appreciate the content. It costs you nothing and helps this channel.